Hi, everyone. Welcome to the CRWS Yurugu book study. We are working on Chapter 8, Behavior Towards Others, pages 473 to 485.
Awesome. So can we share? It doesn't necessarily have to be a summary of what we read, but to share some any insight that we that this portion discusses. Anyone like to start?
I can start. One of the things that stood out to me during this section is the whole idea. Again, it brings up religion, and it also brings up how religion was used to make, quote unquote, like Africans like more human, and that was their way of like spreading it or forcing it upon them, is saying, hey, this is the way you should act. And I found this interesting because I see it practiced today, how religion is just such a like widely practiced, like Christianity, for like mostly I'm talking about Christianity practice within like African American communities and even like African communities, because I only know that because I went to Ghana, and I realized like, wow, this is my first experience outside of the US, and I didn't know that Christianity was so like popular, if you will. I'm not sure if that's the correct word, but due to like colonization and stuff. And I think it's very interesting how, as we're talking about the cultural other and then behavior towards others, is that, hey, we came up with this Christianity religion that we would love for you guys to follow to make you guys more human, because you guys are not like, you guys aren't tamed. And another thing too, that as we know, this is just like something, a reflection of themselves and how Europeans feel about themselves. But that really stood out to me. And I feel like as we go on in these, I don't want to say chapters, but throughout these sections that we're reading, it's getting more clear. And it's providing more examples and I guess different words, but kind of saying the same thing as it was previously in the book. So it's getting a little bit repetitive, but I don't really mind that because it's giving different examples and putting it in different contexts. Should I popcorn someone, or should anyone can go?
Yeah, I don't mind going. So yeah, what I really first of all, I agree with what you said. It is using a lot of information, saying a lot of the same information in a different way. One of my biggest takeaways is like Platonic thought and the practice of religion are just the two most dominant ways in which the European ontology and etymology works, meaning this is that governs their behavior, and it's quite simple. They've characterized and classified non-white people as like heathens and inhumans and associations with animals. They've done all these things to appease their own self-image, and also to give them things to do, like to practice their frustration and their I guess homicidal nature. So they're not destroying each other. They focus all their energy and attention outwards on non-white people. So it was really good to kind of get that more clear, because it's very simple. There's two races on the planet, white and non-white.
Thank you so much, Mr. and Nana, for sharing. Yeah, we're getting a further depth into how does the European, how do the whites view themselves, and how do they view non-whites? And we understand that due to their nature, they have to view blacks, non-whites as animals, savages, and like what Sarah just mentioned, heathens. And this is all necessary for them to channel their destructive energy from themselves onto others. And this is a process that, due to their asili, they have an infinite amount of energy to do so, which is why we have Europeans expanding everywhere, trying to put their presence everywhere on planet Earth, and Christianity being a huge role in making that possible. Kweku, I asked, like to share.
Yeah, I can go. So for this section on starts with the European ideology and the concept of the cultural other. So like others said previously, she goes through kind of like different institutions or thoughts, as in like Christianity, scientism, and she kind of, and progressivism, and she kind of hints at the next chapter where she kind of talks about European ideology more. And so she shows how these types of institutions, like the education system, religion, etc., perpetuate white supremacy in different ways. And basically, at the end of it, they all produce a logic where the non-white person is the other that needs to be saved or changed in some way, even though no matter what they'll do, they'll never actually like be able to fit that standard. And then she goes through the utamaroho and imperialism and talks about how they rationalize imperialism, and goes through kind of what she talked about in the past with like the Platonic thought process in terms of rationalizing their behavior, and turning it into like almost like math, the way they treat people. And then I think at the end, she just kind of consolidates all of the information from the whole chapter to just go through like what is the logic behind all of this, even if it may be like contradictory.
Very well said. Well, thank you, everybody. Those were very detailed, and I don't know what else I can add. But for me, these sections, I tend to understand from these sections in particular are that because of how we have been, so, I guess, entwined, or we identify so much with European culture, we take on a lot of these attributes and these characteristics. Therefore, we don't understand that we are the other, or there is a cultural other. And she also gives reasons as to why racism is, once again, kind of repetitive, like Naya was saying, but why racism isn't, specific to European cultural behavior, and, the cultural other having a lot to do with that. That's it for me. Thank you. Very well said.
Thanks, everyone. So that brings me to my first question, which is what does European ideology believe about non-whites?
Well, European ideology, I would say, believes that non-whites are a race of beings, a group of beings that need to be saved, that are uncivilized or savage, and therefore deserve to be dominated by, the European culture and its people.
Yeah, European ideology has a large vocabulary for non-whites. There's entire theories that exist because of non-whites. One of them is criminology. So I would say all non-white people are, criminals, are suspected to be criminals, thieves, robbers, rapists, violent thugs, criminals. There's a ton. The list goes on. European ideology does not see non-white people as people who can govern themselves. They need to be surveillanced 24/7. They need to be guided. Their whole lives need to be, orchestrated by them. That's why Black people across the world are living in ghettos. Their whole families have been living in ghettos. So it's a whole, cycle of white people, not only having these thoughts about these non-white people, but also turning them into what they think about them, creating ghettos and flooding them with drugs and guns. So yeah.
One of the things I see throughout this chapter is the words like dehumanization and non-human. So it only makes me want to think that Europeans view the cultural other as like not as a human being. And also, like I remember on the first page here at the bottom, it says how Europeans view themselves as a positive self-image within the context of one cultural philosophy, which necessarily implies a negative image of others. And then it goes on and talks about the human aspect versus like the non-human. And it's like, okay, if the Europeans are human, then everyone else must be non-human. And I think it goes to the ideology that they have of individualism, where they feel as if like it's either me or nothing else that exists. So I think that is one of the things too, like thinking like current, like in our system today, as we think of like the different refinement systems or different refinement tactics that they have to refine white supremacy, is that they continuously say like, hey, you guys are not human, so come partake in this religion, or come over here and we can give you what you're missing. If you want straighter hair, come over here, we can provide that to you. If you want to be lighter skinned, come over here, we can provide that to you. If you want to be in a role as a like a European, we can definitely give that to you, but you must act like us and be like us, but we're still going to treat you like a non-human. So it's just very interesting that it continues to perpetuate this idea of like, hey, everyone else is non-human, but now in today's society, we'll let you into our spaces, treat you like a non-human, but expect you to act like us and to strive to be us.
Wow, thank you, Nanaya. That's a great answer. I would say the Europeans, they view us as savages, backwards animals, here to be treated like inanimate objects. And I say inanimate objects because they also view us as passive. And all of their views on us has been made a reality due to the system of white supremacy. And what I mean by that is that we have become wild beasts. We have become passive if you look at the global collective of non-white Black people, because we're not attempting to solve the problem, it seems. So not only have they in their brain computers perceived us to be these wild beast animals who are uncivilized, they have made it such, which is why we can have situations like the projects or urban communities where Black people drive around and shoot each other, where Mexicans drive around, shoot each other, stab each other. And it's because we've been made to literally be what the European believes of us through their systems and through their brain trashing of us. I would like to answer the question.
Yeah, I think basically what both of you said, I think it's the idea that we are primitive and backwards, and that we I guess our traditional religions are based in like paganism, and so and irrational too. So then it feeds into like I've been watching stuff about like missionaries and stuff, and it feeds into this idea of like the white people have to save us. That's why we always see like the very common image of like white people in like Haiti or something with like all of these Black children and like no Black adults or anything around. It's supposed to be this idea of like the children are kind of like representation of like all Black people because they're seen as these like primitive and backwards. So yeah. I think that was really interesting for me was on 475 when she talks about Cecil Rhodes and like the idea of the Rhodes Scholar. I thought that part was, and also on 474 when she says the massacres, the bombings, the mutilations, and the enslavement of others are singled out as the isolated and horrendous acts of an overzealous or evil militarist, colonialist, imperialist, or slaver. In this way, the society's academia, its political liberals, its clergy, and its social theoreticians disassociate themselves from these patterns and absolve their guilt. And I really liked that line because I think so many people have a really basic level understanding of like what white supremacy is. And I think it's never an understanding that goes beyond like, oh, these are the horrible massacres that have happened, but it's within like all of these institutions. And so I think the part where she talks about, because I've heard a lot of people be like, oh, this person's a Rhodes Scholar, and it's supposed to be like this huge achievement and accomplishment. And to know like who Cecil Rhodes actually is very sad that, you know, non-white people, especially Black people, will pride themselves in getting these types of awards or attaining these types of, I guess, white tools of validation because they're inherently based in, you know, white people who have caused a lot of suffering to non-white people. It's, I think any type of awards base that come from white people shouldn't be glorified in Black community, or I guess in the Black collective.
That's a very interesting point that you make. I love how you said that nothing, right? Nothing should be rewarded. I mean, it should be praised in a form of reward. And I think one of the things too, it gets kind of confusing when we grow up in this society, because literally everything is given to us by the white supremacists. And I think that's important to state too, is like, you almost can't even like not drift, but like hide from the system because the system already got you. But I think it's just that initial thing when you get awarded something, it goes back to Mr. Neely Fuller in the Compensatory Logic Code Book. It talks about how show-offism, you know, it's like you get this award and then you want to show it off to everyone, or you get this Grammys award and you want to just show it off. And I think it's just like, oh, I want to go on stage and receive my award. But you can simply just say, mail it to my house. I don't want to go to the stage, or I don't want to go to the graduation, or I don't want to go to the X, Y, and Z. But I think it's just like a form of like, it's almost inevitable because they're like almost crying to give a Black person an award. The first Black scholar, the first Black whatever, you know. So it's just very interesting. I love
how, like, the first Black this is never like, it's always seen as an accomplishment for the Black people, not a stain on the institution that it's taken this long for a Black person to even get this. So it's like, say it as a form of pride when it should be like a form of shame, you know?
Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to add on that section on a little bit before what Ash was reading. It says, it is in the nature of the culture to allow for the verbal disapproval of the most dramatic instances of European abuse of others, since such disapproval has no existential consequences. Its rhetorical, hypocritical, and abstract style make it possible for the culture that produces such behavior to simultaneously disown it. And this is something that, you know, I've kind of seen a lot lately, especially at the time when, you know, the voting was going on. I see, you know, we have the liberals going, you know, supporting Joe Biden, but, you know, just they talk about the crime bill, right, and act like it's something that happened so long ago, and like, oh, that was just a single act of, you know, ignorance. I didn't really know, blah blah. And, we have people defending it, acting like that something like that will never be allowed to happen again, just being verbal about it, right? And then we also have the instance of, one thing that comes up a lot with the vaccinations, going on, or like Tuskegee, and people verbally disapproving it and then acting like, oh, that was a one-off thing, nothing like that will ever happen again, and but there's nothing else that follows it, right? There's no kind of guarantees or anything. There's just people verbally saying, oh, that stuff's not going to happen again, So when she was speaking about this, those were kind of the thoughts that came to my mind, and how, European culture continuously does that. They just verbally disapprove things. They don't ever back it up. And us as non-white people continue to fall for it, and, so on and so forth.
Man, Craig, I think you bring up a good point, and it brings to mind that white people will give themselves a slap on the wrist for committing atrocities against Black people, like, for example, the Tuskegee incident you just mentioned. No one was sent to jail for that, and this study happened for over 30 years. No one was sent to jail. No one was, from my knowledge, given any sort of compensation. So the literal slap on the wrist that white people give themselves is just, hey, we did something bad. That was an unpleasant thing that we did, and then that's literally the end of it. Holocausting Black people in Africa. King Leopold, that was really unfortunate what King Leopold did. Let's take down a few statues, but is a Congo compensated for the massive destruction? Is justice instilled in these areas from the mistreatment? Of course not. So this is just how the European operates. They're very hypocritical.
I also want. Oh, sorry.
They do it to themselves. If something is done to them the same way, they'll bomb a whole country and call it revenge or call it justice.
Yeah, exactly. Joe Biden once again comes out apologizing for the crime bill, all this and that. Yeah, I have not heard him, doing one thing about, the numerous Black people in jail. I haven't heard him, talk about setting them free, or, any kind of laws or anything that have to do with that, but Black people lined up and voted for him, put him back in power. The same man who locked up generations of Black people and their fathers, effectively broke the Black family. And, once it's like you said, a slap on the wrist. Nothing happened. He came out and said it was a terrible thing he did, but what did he do to fix it? Nothing.
Thank you.
Like, at that time, Black people were defending the crime bill, like the Black liberal people. They were literally saying, like, don't you know how dangerous it was back then? Like, we needed it, or something like that. So that's just showing how Black people would go out of their way to defend white supremacy and get a seat at the table.
Actually, literally took the words from my mouth. I was gonna say the same thing, but just to add into what Kwaku had mentioned, in 2005 had mentioned prior to this conversation about the crime bill, going back quickly to Tuskegee, and one of the things that Kwaku mentioned is that people are saying, hey, this is not gonna happen again, but it's like, yeah, no duh, no duh, it's not gonna happen again, because they essentially got caught. So now what they're doing, they're gonna refine it, make it even better, and change it to where it's like, oh, we're gonna slide it under the table and no one's gonna notice this time. So I think everything is just being refined and making sure, hey, how can we do this in a way that isn't questioned? And I think that's something too to think about, especially as we're going to finish throughout this book. It's just like we're learning their tactic, literally. They're refining every single system that they have. We got the crime bill. Everyone's like, oh, that was on my behalf. I'm sorry. And then they're going to slide another bill if they have not already. They probably slid like so many bills already, and most people don't even read them. But it's one of those things too, like they're gonna give these bills out there knowing that Black or non-white people have no power. So it's just like this cycle of like, hey, you guys need to vote to pretend in order to stop something that's inevitably going to happen, regardless if the bill is passed or not.
And well said, Anaya. And it's just another clear example of how non-whites are just not understanding the system and white supremacists like Joe Biden, because on my Facebook, the non-whites on my Facebook are calling Joe Biden Moneybag Joe because he's giving crumbs, more crumbs from the system are falling on the Black people, so they're celebrating it and like doing all these things, but totally unaware that if you get anything from white supremacists, it's going to come at a cost. And also, they're just crumbs. What we really need is a system of justice. We don't need a stimulus. We need a system of justice. And I think this part, I want to comment on 475 because it's just reminds me of how in the culture of white supremacy, it seems that we beat, violence is used to like, for example, Black parents, they beat their children for them to be good, you know? And I think that falls in line with what's mentioned on 475, where she says, the Christian mandate to impose this conception on other peoples represents the epitome of the European utamaroho. Essential to this proselytizing mission is an invidious comparison in which the non-European, or what Chen Wenzu put in 1978, the rest of us comes out not only the loser, but is dehumanized as well. The pagan, heathen, idolater, and polytheists have no religion in the terms of European definition. Yet, these are all terms used to describe our spiritual conceptions. We are cultural others. We are morally inferior. We are less than human. Therefore, whatever is done to us with the object of making us more human, examples giving us religion, is justifiable. So what this hints at is that no matter, like, white people were brutalized, non-whites, under the guise of we're making you better. We have to do this to you to civilize you. We have to come into the Congo and take all your resources because we're civilizing you. We're giving you religion. We're making you better through maiming and destruction. So I think this is I think that's what's been happening since white people have been in power.
And just to add to that, 05, just a little bit above there, it says, I'm just going to read it quickly. It says, in chapter 2, we attempted to clarify the relationship of Christian ideology to European imperialism and pointed to the way in which Christian thought has contributed to European nationalism by intensifying the we-they dichotomy of which it depends, and by providing corresponding images of European and majority people that mandate the unlimited expansion of Western European political control. And the reason why I wanted to read that is because the we-they dichotomy, or just like dichotomous thinking in general, is very popular within the European culture. Like that is how they are able to say cultural other, or in or out, or Black, white, we-they again. And they use that, and especially in religion, it's either you're a sinner or you're not. And then they say you're all sinners, but then it's like you're either you go to heaven or you go to hell. So it's just like all of these dichotomy, all this dichotomous thinking is how they're able to control so many people. Because so many people is like, if I'm in the out group, I want to be in the in group. But then it's like all of these ways to where it's like, okay, if I'm not gonna, like, again, if you say, for example, like the we and the they, as they used in the example on the book here, it's like they use this through like transmedia or multimedia. It's like, oh, I'm gonna put a skinny blonde head girl on here and say this is pretty. So anything outside of that means that you're not pretty. Or they say like, oh, if you have a bachelor's degree, you're successful. Anything outside of that, you know, and it just continues to like attack you from so many angles to where it's like, even if you say, oh, I'm okay to be in the out group, I'm okay to be in this out group, it's like eventually you're going to get caught up because they're going to put a two-way street in front of you and you're going to have to pick one or the other. And then there's going to be another one, another one, another one until they actually get you in the position that they want you in. So I think that's very interesting, especially with imperialism. And even going back to slavery, it's like, hey, you want to live here? Like when Africans got enslaved, they provided them with this two-way street, which was either work for us or die, you know? And it's like, well, damn. But yeah, I just wanted to bring that up. I thought that was very important, especially when you brought up the religion aspect of it. And that's like one of Christian ideologies. One of their main things is like they love to pull some dichotomous thing or dichotomy things. It's just like, oh, it's either this or that. No in between.
Well said. And I think the Christian, the weapon that is Christianity is so powerful and so insidious because we have like the entire. I'm pretty sure the majority of Africa has been affected with Christianity, which is what I've been hearing, and it's really, I think it's really important to understand what Christianity does to the mind and what it really means. And I think this passage from 476 is an excellent example of what Christianity is doing, what it does. And she says, the Judeo-Christian tradition interlocks with other aspects of European ideology that have played similar roles in terms of definitions of European cultural nationalism. From the frame of reference of progressionism, evolutionism, which it must be understood is not easily distinguishable from Christian thought. The pagan becomes not only non-religious, but pre-religious. She becomes backwards and ignorant. She lacks the intellectual acumen to develop, reach civilization, European culture. She becomes primitive, which, as Ashley Matangu has pointed out, translates into backwards, retro-progressive, arrested, retarded. In evolutionistic terms, the primitive man is not really in a human state, but best representative of an evolutionary earlier stage of the European. Wow. So this is indicating and telling us is that we are definitely like viewed as less than human, and a large component to that is how Christianity has been used and what Christianity truly represents, which is a huge tool of white supremacy. So we get to introduce to the terms anthropomorphs or anthropos, which is just a human, an animal-like creature that it just gives me the thought. When I was reading this, I'm like thinking of how do white people really see Black people? And I'm seeing that when they see a Black person in real life, they see some kind of creature figure. Like their psychology is so messed up that they literally don't even see what you and I would see when we look at each other. They see something else, some kind of distorted form of what they what we should be or something like that. It's just really something to think about. Ezekiel, I mean, quickly.
Yeah.
On 526, I really agree with what you just said. I also have similar theories.
I think Kwaku was talking, Serge.
Yeah, so I wanted to add, as we're talking about this, we want to understand that this is the cult that we're talking about how European culture is projected onto the cultural other, you know, being non-white people. So when we're talking about the hypocrisy and all this, how Christianity for, you know, the European culture amongst themselves is different for the cultural other and the people outside of the culture who participate in Christianity. On page 475, she brings up a very interesting she says on 475, the isms of European thought are all based on an image of the cultural other that in turn regulates the behavior of Europeans towards majority people. I think that's a very important statement as we talk about progressivism and evolutionism, because on 477 we're at the first paragraph. It says, in combination, then progressivism and evolutionism transform people of other cultures into savages, while the proponents of these theories themselves become civilized and therefore responsible for the guidance, control of those who are not. It is European evolutionism that places the cultural other under the microscope. When she becomes a savage in the mind of the European, the assumption is not only that she is a wild beast, but that she is an object to be studied as well, since she and her culture represent the earliest stages of the Europeans' existence. The cultural other has exactly the same value as a Neanderthal skull. The assumptions and mood of a scientific perspective make the above combination of ideas coherent for Europeans. So we have so many isms, roaming around, capitalism, racism, progressivism, evolutionism, all the isms, and the idea that they are, based on the concept of the cultural other. Therefore, it's like it only applies to us. And this idea of evolutionism, I think, from what I read and what I believe, is what basically gave birth to this whole idea of savagery, backwardsness, and primitiveness. The idea that the European, because of evolutionism, the European has evolved beyond the cultural other. Therefore, these people need to be studied and examined, for the purposes of white supremacy, or mainly for the purposes of establishing that superiority complex that is so evident in the European culture.
Well said, Kwaku. And thanks for reading that really important part.
Sir, did you want to go?
I just wanted to say that I do think Europeans see non-white people, primarily, especially Black people. I think their psychology has definitely morphed in a way that they do see Black people as like some type of blobs of Black threats. Something that 00526 said is something that I often think about is how do they really see us? And also that question comes along with what do they talk about when there's no Black people around and it's no one's recording?
Yeah. Well said, Mr. Sir. That was excellently put. Blobs of Black threads, shadow figures in the night, out on the hunt to take white women is how they view us, I'm assuming. What's white supremacy for you?
I wanted to say I really like that part. The cultural other has exactly the same value as a Neanderthal skull. When I read that, I just felt a lot of feelings. Like it just I feel like it's such an accurate description of like the way that white people view, especially Black people, because Black people are like the first people. And I think it's so interesting because it puts a lot of things into context in terms of the way that they view Black people as being like their connection to spirituality, like why they have Black people take care of their kids and all this other type of stuff. And I think it's really interesting because no matter the institution or environment, whether it's like religion, whether it's like academia, whether it's like scientism, it's always based in ideas of progression for them and linear time. And that progression and linear time produces a hierarchy based in their ideas of evolution. So I just think it's so interesting because you can see people like have arguments about Christianity and evolution and stuff like that. But like at the end of the day, they're all based in this idea of progressing. They're all based in this idea of like the white person as the pinnacle, right? As like the Renaissance man. So I just thought that was really powerful. Like, and that's what made me really understand the asili better. Yeah.
I agree. I mean, she even goes on to give that that quote, you know, about the African pygmy, and it seems, you know, that, you know, once again the culture, the asili, has, you know, exposed itself by, you know, showing that we, you know, we as the culture of others serves no other purpose other than be examined for, you know, the purposes of racism and white supremacy, that we don't provide any value to that culture unless it is to, you know, be compared to or to be studied. So I think
Yeah, there's this book called Brave New World. And in the book, there's like different, like the society categorizes people as like alpha, beta, whatever. And like the alphas are obviously like white people. They're like, they don't like they don't give birth to children. They have kids through like test tubes, etc. They don't breastfeed. Like all of them, they're very like robotic and rational. And then the lowest group of people are the epsilons, and they live in like the outskirts, and like they like, you know, get pregnant and things like that. And so like in the book, like the alpha people never interact with the epsilon, but when they see them at one time, they're like so shocked. Like the kids are shocked because they've never seen a pregnant person, or they've never seen like people dancing and stuff. And I think like that's supposed to represent like how white people view like black people, right, as like the savage. It's just it's a really interesting book in terms of understanding like the white mind and stuff.
if I could ask, what was their reaction when they like saw them dancing? Like, you know, I have an idea, but I want you to confirm.
Well, I think they were like shocked and horrified and like really disgusted. But I think there was also like one white person, or not alpha person, who like kind of was like fetishizing it or something. Like he was the, you know how there's always like white people who are like, oh, I'm on the outskirts, like I don't believe in, you know, like whiteness. So then they just go through the other opposite of just like completely fetishizing black people. It's still dehumanizing, it's just a different form. So it was like that too.
Oh, okay. Yeah, my one of my guesses were, you know, they went out there and bombed everyone into oblivion. But you know, racism.
Speaking on the dehumanization, did anyone have plans to read the pygmy part? So I think maybe we should talk about this because it's really tragic. But understanding white supremacy, we shouldn't be surprised. So she states the following clipping appeared in a New York African newspaper in the early 1900s. Otabenga, the African pygmy, is to stay at the zoological park a few days longer. This was decided at a conference between Director Hornaday and the Committee of Baptist Clergymen appointed by the Colored Baptist Ministers Conference to save Benga from appearing on expedition in a monkey cage, and if possible, also to get custody of him. The length of time he is still to remain an inmate of the primate house in the park is dependent on Dr. Werner's return from North Carolina. As soon as he returns, he, the Director Hornaday, and Rev. Hames II Gordon, the chairman of the committee, will have another conference. The clergyman will then try through Mr. Gordon to get possession of Benga so that they may send him to Lynchburg, VA to be educated. Director Hornaday is not willing to give him into the hands of the clergyman without an agreement that he will be delivered to Dr. Werner again when he wants him. So they're talking about a black male person, like a piece of property, like an animal. And the black male, of course, is also being treated like an animal because he's being housed and showcased in a zoo. So this is what white supremacy manifests. And we have it looks like we have non-whites involved, but that's never to be surprised when non-whites are helping racist men and racist women maintain the system, because that's what we're trained to do, forced to do. But I just think it's very telling that they can rationalize having people in zoos, but that's not surprising to me, because if a race of people can have children slaves that they rape, eat, and brutalize every day, then having a black person in the zoo is nothing too outrageous for a white person to do.
Yeah, I mean, even following that, Dr. Ani talks about how, scientism, she says it's scientism that makes universalistic schemes compelling. I understand that to be, this practice of scientism, once again, the ism in practice, makes it seem interesting and almost justifiable, treating somebody like that, for the purposes of science, trying to achieve something. I don't know, what exactly are they trying to achieve by treating somebody like that? I don't know. But to add to that, she mentions too that it gives credence to a value system that defines European culture as a universally beneficial and evolutionary inevitable stage of human existence. Other cultures represent various stages of development towards that culture. So it's like, I understand that as, European culture being the epitome of all cultures, the end game, the end goal of it all. And, by them examining all other cultures are kind of like evolutionary stages. So therefore, in the same process, inferiorizing other cultures and other people and, treating their culture as superior. So it's just this practice of scientism, evolutionism, etc., just continues to reinforce this idea of superior, the European culture as being superior and all other cultures being inferior.
Yeah, I agree. And to add on 478, when she says his act of thinking about an object alone gives him the ability to render it motionless, powerless. It must sit still for his circumspection, i.e. his theoretical consumption. And it reminds me of Kweku was showing this video about kids in the 1950s, I think, that live in Africa. And this white chick who lived in South Africa, and she literally kept saying that before the white settlers got there was nothing there. There was no one there. The Bantu people like just somehow weren't there, but were and it's just like so interesting because it's like in a way like she sees that whole continent as like empty. Like she sees that continent as like motionless until white people get there. And once like that's like the whole thing about like if the tree falls in the forest or whatever, did it and nobody heard it, did it really happen? Like that's completely like white logic, right? It's like if we were not there, then like that society was not real. It's the same thing that they do with like indigenous people in America. They always say that, oh, there was only like a couple 100,000 and they didn't have actual societies or something, as if like them having a society would deem them like unfit to genocide or something. It's very interesting, but I just thought it was, I just really like that, the way she put that, because I think for a lot of people, a lot of white people, non-white people are literally just like statues. And like the countries they exist in just are forever stuck, to them at least, in this stasis. Like they never change, they never grow, unless a white person is there to help them or something.
And one of the things I would like to add, thank you, Ash, for that, is that, as I mentioned in the chat, is like looking how they describe Black people in media or in daily life. Like if you hear them talk about a Black person, they use words as they would correlate to an animal, you know. And even going back into like some of the books you read and you see like, oh, as we read earlier, we talked about earlier, the word savage. That's essentially what you would say to an animal, like, oh, that animal is a savage, you know. Of someone who's eating another animal, that's like what the phrase would go like, or would say. And I think like one of the things too is that it's almost becoming normalized, the way the words they use to describe um like even just non-white behavior, but Black people behavior in general. They use it in a way that is equivalent to what they use for an animal. So as you mentioned, Ash, that how they went to a place and they're like, oh, nothing is lifeless here, nothing's here, you know, nothing's here. Even if there are animals there, they'll still say nothing is there, because you can see their relationship with animals. I'm not talking about like pets, but I'm talking about like actual animals. They kill them for food, they wear them for clothes, you know, and they just like torture them and mistreat them. So it's like one of those things of like, if they can do that to an actual animal and then equivalent that to a group of people, like, hey, you guys are not even, you're not human at all, but you're like almost an animal, but lower than that. So we're going to treat you just that, you know? So I think it's very interesting as we go through our lives today, kind of like look at the words that they describe Black people, especially in the media. That's just, the news just got it all twisted.
Yeah, to add to that last point, about, I think that has a lot to do with, you know, the self-image that the European culture has created for itself. She gives a list, and I wanted to read these ones. Well, some of them are agent of change, the doer, the personification of intelligence, and the inheritor of the earth. So, you know, going back to the idea that, you know, there's nothing was happening there until they got there. Nothing was, I guess, quote unquote, progressing until they got there, because they're the ones that come and they start everything, right? They get everything going. They're the ones that add, you know, in quotes again, advanced societies, you know. So just to add to that point.
I think that's a good segue into my next question for the group, which is how does the European view themselves? I'll start. I suspect and believe that they view themselves as masters of the universe. They truly think that they have a right to conquer the planet, dominate the peoples of the planet. It's their God's given right. They are the peoples who they're the doers on planet Earth. They go to places like Africa and get things done. The things being done is using the resources in a way that they see is more constructive. They are the ones who have all the power. They're the ones who are perfect. They're the ones who are supreme. That's what they believe to be themselves, about themselves.
Yeah, for me, I would say they believe that they're God. You know, I think that they definitely believe that nothing comes into existence without them, and nothing leaves existence without them. I think that they believe that they control and or can control everything in the universe.
Yeah, I think that they believe themselves to be like Dr. Ani says, the ones who have overcome the kind of battle between rationalism and like sensuality or like spirituality, and that they are the pinnacle rational man. And I think that's also why they like have this weird fetish for Black people, because because they also see themselves as like yearning for like a connection to spirituality, and maybe obviously in a superficial way, but that's why there's like we have this whole like meditation and like mindfulness like push that's even happening in people's workplaces and stuff. It's because like the European kind of sees that as like beneficial, because if people work, if people's mental states are better, they'll work harder, they'll make more money for us. And so, but I think that they almost see like non-white people as like conduits for that spirituality that they have, I guess, overcome, they have rationalized.
To answer that, is one of the things I think they view themselves as is the basically like the all-knowing, like the supreme all-knowing. And the reason why I say it that way is because supreme, like, oh, we're superior in every aspect of life. And then all-knowing as like, we know everything. Like, we know everything. We are supreme. You can't tell me nothing.
Would anyone else like to answer the question? Alrighty. Does anyone have anything else to share from the text?
I just wanted to talk quickly about kind of like the last section. I mentioned earlier about how this, racism is, endemic, is specific to European culture. So there's the idea, that in every culture there are people who are within the culture and that there are people outside of that culture. But European culture is different in that way that they treat people outside of that culture. Dr. Ani mentions that, and majority peoples or African people's culture, that, even though you are not within that culture, or viewed within that culture, you're still, given privileges, or, just accepted as being a human living being that deserves the right to living. Whereas in, European culture, everyone doesn't have that right? The white supremacists control. They feel that they can control when people get to exist, what people can do, what they should believe in, etc. And that's really why that's something that's very special and not special, but something that's particular to European culture. So people oftentimes will talk about how violence happens in other cultures, and racism is just another form of violence on the planet. It is a form of violence, but no, this kind of violence has never existed on the planet, at least to the people in the known universe. That you deserve to be killed, humiliated, controlled, because one, because of the color of your skin, and two, because you are not viewed as somebody within the culture, the European culture. And the people who are within that culture are the white people, the I don't know, maybe Hitler's definition of those people. So that's something I wanted to bring up.
I would like to read from page 482.
Mm-hmm.
Just briefly in the conclusion section, just because I feel like it's very important to state this. I know if you are watching and you've seen our previous book clubs, we mentioned this a lot, so I'm going to restate it again. It says at the bottom, the relationship between European intercultural behavior and European behavior towards others is that the lack of love, sympathetic relationship for each other requires an other to absorb aggression and to allow a bond of identification to form between the members of the culture. And I really want to read this because it's like, in order to, their lack of love is mainly what we can say, like, oh, they don't have any love, that's why they show so much aggression. But you can't really put two and two together, because just because they lack love doesn't mean that they need to have aggression. But one of the things that stood out the most in this section is that there needs to be a cultural other, quote unquote, in order for like this aggression to exist. Because they need something to absorb their aggression. They need something to like almost help them live, help them be a being in the universe. It's like, hey, if there wasn't a cultural other, the European wouldn't exist. So, or to be more specific, like if there wasn't a cultural other, European, like quote unquote behavior, like as we're learning now, like their ideologies and white supremacy, it wouldn't exist.
Yeah, to add, because I thought you brought up a great point about, the lack of love. So, we have a culture here who lack love. They seek out love. They find it in another culture. So what in turn, makes them attack that culture when you found exactly what you were looking for? You were seeking love, you found it, and in return, you've annihilated that culture or the people within that culture. You've labeled them as cultural others. You've labeled them as people to be, killed, humiliated, and controlled. So I think that that's a very good point. And, the lack of love being, I think that's also something that is, specific to European culture. Maybe, the lack of love within that culture, I think that, at least in my opinion, my observations, I've seen that other cultures, they have that love for each other. They have that community, that communal culture that provides that, that platform for the love for that love to exist. Whereas in European culture, they don't have that. They're very individualistic, materialistic, and therefore, create a culture that doesn't serve them.
Yeah, I would say that the white people, European, they don't care about love. The only thing they care about is power and maintaining it. And I want to read this part from 479 quickly, where she said the difference between the militarist and the missionary is only one of modus operandi. The blows of one are more physically apparent. Those of the other leave battered souls and cultures in their wake. But this is what war being conducted against the people looks like. You have to attack on all fronts. Yeah, they use guns and technology and death-producing technology, but religion, Christianity, white culture, all of it is a war against Black people if you truly understand what's happening on planet Earth. Whether it's a missionaries knocking on your door or your door getting kicked down by soldiers, the war is happening. I think also on 482, where I think this part is really important because it's just a great response to people still very confused about who can be racist, what racism is. And this part right here is just a clear indication that the only people who can be racist are white people. And it's two reasons, because they're white and because this is a part of their nature. So Dr. Ani says, therefore, while power and racialism may play a part in the collective behavior of other culture groups, only Europeans are racist by nature. And because of their culture, this is so because one, they are the only people whose culture, asili, is energized by the drive for power. Two, because racism can be identified as systematic behavior resulting from xenophobia in combination with the concrete circumstances of power. And three, finally, because only the European utamaroho is insufficient. So therefore demanding a cultural racial other to relate to. This combination makes racism endemic to European culture and defines the goals of white supremacy. European power over others as the supreme goal of the culture. That is a statement that no other culture can make. Power over anything. That's the white supremacy mindset. Bombing, raping, pillaging, anything goes if we can gather more power to dominate, more power to conquer, more power in the form of resources stolen out of Africa, stolen out of Asia, stolen from everywhere white people go. This is what a war looks like.
Yes. She also mentioned, I think that what she's doing here is very important, that, us as non-white people, us as, majorities people, us as those of us viewed as the cultural other, we need to understand really our position, and that we are viewed as these cultural others, these people outside of the European culture, the Western culture. She says on 483 that my ultimate concern is to favorably influence the rest of us in our capacity to realize self-determination, to eliminate Europe as an impediment to our progress and as a cause of our destruction. So I think, really right here, like I said, really understanding that we as a people are viewed as cultural others. And therefore, when we come to realize that, we can no longer, allow Europe to, this European culture, these European ideologies, these European concepts to keep us from achieving, our ultimate goal, which should be justice on the planet, balance between all people. But no longer can we, I'm gonna end there.
Well said, Kwaku. Yeah, I think the final thing I want to share from the text is on 484, just so we all have a understanding of it. So she says the culture is so successful at gaining power because there is nothing within the culture that effectively conflicts with the achievement of power. What this description of their behavior has shown us is that anything goes. So now we can understand King Leopold's Papa. Now we can understand every atrocity ever. It's because as long as they're getting power, they'll do whatever they think they have to do, whether that's mutilating people, displacing people. So this is what the non-white collective is dealing with. A truly insane psychopathic entity that call themselves white or European. And just very interesting and definitely a message to take home. And that being,
yes.
Should we get into further comments?
I wanted to share one more thing, and then we can get into that. This will be my last, but the idea that the cultural other is not the same as the traditional enemy. I'm going to read this part on 484. Sorry for the long paragraphs, but I think these need to be read for the viewers to understand. The cultural other is not the same as the traditional enemy. She does not have the status of an enemy. She is less than an enemy. The concept implies the ultimate in dehumanization and devaluation. European behavior towards others is so extreme in part because their conception of the cultural other is so negative. Atrocities are no longer atrocities if their objects are invisible. They become atrocities only because those on whom they are perpetrated have some meaning. So, the idea that the cultural other and that there's a cultural other and there's a traditional enemy. So even though Europeans may fight with one another, that is what we call, intercultural behavior towards one another. Their goal is never to annihilate one another. Their goal is never to, completely kill off one another. Their goal is, it may be a small scuffle in their history, but for when it comes to the cultural other, that that doesn't apply to them. So we as people viewed outside of that culture need to understand that once again we are the cultural other, and that we are not viewed as a traditional enemy, because even inside the European culture, they do have some rules, some regulations on how they will treat their tradition, their quote unquote traditional enemies. But for the cultural other, no holds barred. Everything goes. Doesn't matter. Atrocities mean absolutely, there's no such thing as an atrocity when it comes to a cultural other, because that's the purpose that they serve. They serve a purpose to be dominated, controlled, and killed. You know, we essentially are test subjects, right? I shouldn't laugh because it's inappropriate, but we are test subjects. You know, we are the people that the European culture will practice, white supremacy will practice their tools of mass destruction and use them against. They will never go out into Europe and attack other people that look like them with those weapons. And it's evident, the evidence is everywhere on the planet. All you have to do is, you know, turn on the news.
Thank you, Kwaku. I think that part is very, very important as well. Then how does like not even worthy of being the enemy, just the object of torment, which is what non-whites are, objects of torment, it seems. And so it makes it should bring the World War I and World War II into reflection, because lots of white on white violence. And but why were they fighting each other? Because they were in a disagreement about how to dominate non-whites. So yes, white people can become an enemy amongst themselves, but due to how they view us, we are not even worthy of being there, seen as an enemy, it seems. Thanks for reading that, Kwaku. So anyone would like to start closing comments?
I can start with closing comments. I would just like to read on 43 as my closing comment, because I feel like it's very important for me to close off with this. So it says, it follows, then that for any group, there are the definitions of, quote, we, and quote, they, quote, self and other. And for any group, these definitions should carry with them behavioral implications. They are not treated the same as we, if only because they do not have priority. We come first. And I wanted to end off with that because I just wanted to make sure that everyone is clear. And for myself, that really just stood out and kind of just summed everything up. Is like, we will always be the cultural other, and we will always be they. You know, there's no way to get in. I'm the in group, quote unquote. So I think it's very important to like say that, because it's like, as a group of people, we shouldn't have to continuously strive, right? Strive to be in. We can just turn on TV or look around, and there's so many people almost striving to be, to act and behave like a European. I'm not going to say that they're striving to be a European like skin, but to act and behave like a European. I think that's very interesting. And one of the things I'm going to just, for an example, is the whole like hair thing, right? Some people will say, oh, I can't wear my fro or my locks or X, Y, and Z hairstyle because it's not, quote unquote, appropriate for a white space. And I think it's very interesting that that is said. Like now, as I'm reading it, it just makes so much sense, because it's like, you will always be they. So no matter what you do, whether your hair is straight or in locks or in a fro or in braids, you're still going to be the cultural other. So thank you.
Well said. No way to get in a system of white supremacy, which is why we should all be attempting to get out by producing justice. My closing comment. This is a really, really great section of the book. The system of white supremacy, the non-white is a mere savage, beast, creature-like being designed to be controlled and tormented by white people. This should be enough for every non-white person on planet Earth to get serious about solving this problem, unless you would like to forever be seen as a savage-like animal beast creature that is designed and destined to be treated poorly, treated violently, and and you just killed for whatever reason, racist man and racist woman feel the need to kill you for.
Yes, for my closing comments, very powerful chapter. These two sections to end the chapter of behavior towards others greatly sum it up. But once again, if anybody leaves here with anything, it should be that we are cultural others, and there is no way into, like 0526 said, there's no way into white supremacy for us. There's no way into it. So the best chance that we all have is to end the system of racism and white supremacy and replace it with a system of justice, balance between all people.
I'll go next. I thought this was a really good way to tie in the whole chapter we've been reading. I'm glad that we finally finished this chapter. I guess with my closing comments is that it was like a good consolidation of everything that we've learned so far. And what I really liked about it was that chart that I think Kweku went through. Yeah, I thought that was really informative. I'm just really excited to get to the next chapters because I really am interested in the ideas of like progression and universality. So yeah, that's all.
Hello.
Hello, Mr. Arma. Would you like to do closing comments?
Yeah. This is my first time of coming around, and I came late, so it's like I'm unable to contribute. But what I want to say is that I think this is a good move. We have a lot to do as people to help our people to decolonize their minds from the shackles of slavery and colonialism. I think this is one of the moves. I would like to know the kind of book you are reading, the page you are right now. So the next time I will download the PDF and study so that I will also be able to contribute. So basically, I came in late, so I'm unable to share anything with regards to what you.
No worries. We're gonna decide the next pages after closing comments. Mr. Aaron, would you like to share closing comments?
Yeah, my closing comments are imperialism, white supremacy, mistreatment. According to the European, those things are not mistreatment. It's just business as usual. And their utamaroho and their utamaroho allows them to treat non-white people as people who are less than human. And it won't change until white supremacy is replaced by justice. And no one should be upset when they see Europeans behaving towards non-white people. They should just knock it down to still utamaroho working effectively and just get on code. That's my closing comments.
Well said, everyone. Ms. Williams, I know you've been listening for a bit. Would you like to share some closing comments? No need, though.
I haven't read this book yet, but anyway, and I can't even promise I'm gonna get into it because I got too much I'm doing. But anyway, I'm listening in, and from what I've heard, I really enjoy it because the more we realize the maneuvers and the tricks that the racist white supremacists are doing to us worldwide, then the better equipped we are to know how to defend ourselves through the injustice that's being done to us, because the injustice is done worldwide. So it's not just in America, it's worldwide. And we all have to unify in the same mind, speaking the same speech, and working to produce justice worldwide. That's all I got.
Thank you, and thank everyone for their closing comments and this great discussion.